Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to everyone in the room, everyone joining us online, and anyone who might be watching from home. I'm just going to pass to Rebecca for a little bit of housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on to item 1, apologies. Have you got apologies this evening?
Yes, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Vanessa Ricketts and Councillor Jamie Martin.
And I believe we've one substitute member.
We do. Councillor Patrick Canavan is substituting for Councillor Jamie Martin.
Great, thank you. And do any of the members have any declarations of interest on anything on the agenda this evening? Nope. Great. And then moving on to minutes of the last meeting. Is there any dissension from the minutes of last meeting? Is everyone happy with those? Take that by agreement. Great, thank you. And public issues. I've been told there's no public issues this evening, which takes us straight on to item 6, which is the recommendations from portfolio holders, cabinet or council. So this item, we normally move to the end of the agenda and have a look in line with the work plan, but tonight we'll just do it as it comes in the agenda. We have a couple of issues which are coming up, 2 requests which have been made by council, and all we're going to do at this time is determine whether or not we want to add them to our work plan. We don't need to determine how the scrutiny will be carried out. So the 2 requests that we have, the first one, which came from full council, is the petition to stop the closure of Red Hill paddling pool, and that was to ask the council to ask Overview and Scrutiny to investigate how we arrived at this situation and investigate ways to keep the paddling pool open and report back to full council. I believe Councillor Edwards, you'd like to speak on this item before we discuss it as a committee? No, you don't have to, that's fine. I just thought with you in the room you may have wanted to, that's okay. Yeah, we can invite you up afterwards if you don't like what we're saying. It's all good. Okay, does anyone on the committee have any strong feelings either way on this item? That was, it should be kept open. So I know when this came, I did actually amend the original motion to have this sentence changed a little bit, because I think the original motion asked us to form a working group, and we said we may not have wanted to do that as an Overview and Scrutiny committee. But personally, I'm comfortable taking this on. I think it fits quite well with what we've been doing. It was excluded from the play strategy. I know there's also other paddling pools across BCP, which we could potentially look at the same time as well. So I would move that we add this to our work plan. Councillor Northover, you want to second that? Great. Councillor Edwards? I don't think you're expecting us to be so quick.
Right. I'm glad you're going to put it on your work plan, because Councillor Bartlett and myself are doing a lot of behind the scenes work, which I can't really discuss in sort of the open at the moment. But if anybody wants to ask us, we're quite happy to discuss sort of that. But I think with having a petition with over 5,000 signatures, I think it just shows just how popular the paddling pool in Red Hill is, and we're trying our very, very best to keep it going for as many years as is possible. So we're hoping that we may have come up with a solution, but it's fingers crossed at the moment, and perhaps good news by the end of the year. But at least it's open this summer, so has been saved for that. And as I say, hopefully it'll be saved for much longer. I went past the park the other day and it was absolutely crammed with people. It is such a popular area for people to take their children. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well done for all the work you're doing on it. And hopefully whatever we choose to do, we'll be able to invite both you and Councillor Bartlett to come and speak to us as well. So can I take that as consensus that we're happy to add that? Great, that's agreed. Thank you. And the second item was the motion to strengthen building standards through local authority control. And that was a amendment which was to send the whole motion here to environment and place. Again, I'll ask if any members of the committee want to speak on that item. Councillor Canavan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was a motion that I seconded, so I guess I ought to declare an interest in it really. But hopefully that you will agree to put it on your work plan. I think it is something that the council should be looking at to see what it can do to strengthen building control. We continue to have issues with these buildings from time to time, so it would be good to see what more we could do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton-Gibson?
Yeah, I actually wanted to suggest the opposite and suggest that we don't put this on the work plan. Simple reason is that D says refer the motion. The motion is A, B and C above. D was an amendment suggested by Councillor David Brown, that we then refer the motion to this committee, when actually we've already carried out A, B and C. The council have agreed A, B and C. We write to the government and we say we should have the adequate funding. So I can't really see that there's, having agreed to do A, B and C, I can't see there's much point in it coming to us to say, well, are we going to do A, B, C or not? Well, council's already decided that. So to me, if council had not passed A, B and C, then I think there would be a logic in referring it to us to say, well, what can we do? But since council have already approved the motion, my question is, what's the point in us debating it? The motion's passed, it's history. We have done what A, B and C says. So to me, there may be a different motion that should come here about building control, but that particular motion as proposed was passed 50-3, 1 abstention.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Dalton-Gibson that that motion was brought and had that amendment tagged onto the end, when what I was expecting to happen to that motion is that it might have been deferred to this committee and then we could have discussed that motion in full. But as A, B and C have been undertaken or will be being undertaken by the leader as was instructed within that motion, I don't think there's a need to bring the motion to us, what this is asking for. But that in no way negates the fact that we could, if we wanted to, do a piece on building control outside of the scope of that motion to look at what options are available. So it doesn't take it off the table, it just means we wouldn't be discussing that motion. So I would agree that we should possibly not add this onto our work plan, which seems to be getting very busy from things which are passed from council, and we should look at whether we want to do a deeper dive into building control at another time. Councillor Canavan.
Accept what you're saying, Chair. I'm just wondering whether it would be more helpful for us to submit a separate overview and scrutiny request to put into the committee, which might go a little bit further than this motion does, and scope out more specifically what it is we would like the council to do. If that's a better way forward, we're happy to do that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I'd really welcome that. I think that'd be a good way to go forward. And actually, I'd happily work on you with that on you as well if you wanted to, and see if we can come up with some really good routes which we could go with. So with that in mind, are we happy to not add this motion onto our work plan? So as consensus? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 7, which is the planning service improvement update, which I think Councillor Earle, you're here for, and we've got Wendy Lane online as well. Are you going to introduce this, Millie?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rigby. Really, it is just to give a brief overview from my point of view, and then Wendy is going to provide a little bit more detail. So, the Planning Improvement Board was established 4 years ago. In fact, this month it was 4 years ago, and the role of it has been to, from identifying some really fundamental issues within the planning service, to try and turn things around. And the last time I came to speak to you, probably this time last year, there was some really good news, really good news coming out of our planning service. I think particularly having recruited Wendy Lane, who joined us in 2023. She's done a really good job at making huge strides in service improvement, and I think that's also been continued with the appointments of Caroline in strategic planning and John in sort of planning ops. The areas for me which really stand out that I'm really proud of is particularly where we have performance measures which are mandated by government, so things like extensions of time and how we use them, making sure we're making decisions in a fair amount of time. And that really relates to the backlog that we used to have within planning service. I don't know if you remember, but I have a feeling when I last came to speak to you, it was about 40. I think we still had about 40 in the system. And these were applications, some of which were going back sort of 5 years, really, really long time back to the legacy authorities. That now is right down. In fact, I think we only have sort of 1 or 2 in the system, but they are on the way to having been dealt with, where there have been blockages before. So I'm really pleased that we don't have those ones hanging around, and in fact the team are very much on top of with how we're dealing with planning applications and how they're going through within the government standards that we're required to do. The other area I wanted to mention is MasterGov, which is the long-awaited merged together planning portal, and I'm not sure if councillors have had a chance to have a look at it, but you may have seen that we no longer have the separate Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch ones. And my initial view of this is that it is a really good system. I think it draws in a lot of the really good things that we particularly had in the Poole portal, and there's still a few tweaks to be made, particularly in terms of including things like the ward lists that we used to have, and that kind of thing. But generally, I think it is really good, and I think it's wonderful now that we have that system across. I think it will make things or lives a lot easier for things like for residents really going to find planning applications, because you don't necessarily know where the boundaries are between Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch when it comes to making those applications. So I'm really pleased to see that come through. And then the other area I just wanted to mention was really the culture change and the positive feedback that we've been receiving. As part of the planning service, we also run an agents and developers regular meetings with agents and developers from across BCP, people who want to build homes and build and develop. I'm always really pleased to hear that they find that the service has improved, and a big part of that was actually investing in pre-application work. So making sure that the pre-app service that we used to run didn't actually provide a huge amount of detail. Instead, we've made a really quality service there. It is not cheap. It's not cheap to go through the pre-planning application, but actually it makes things much better when it comes to finally submitting that actual application, meaning that developers and our planning teams can work together to find ways in which development is appropriate and sustainable. And that seems to be working really well on both sides. That's not to say I'm sure we will still get applicants, developers and all sorts who have an issue with planning and with the service, but on the whole I feel that the service has improved massively. And when I used to have this area in my portfolio, I used to have development management for the last 2 years. I now very rarely get emails about complaints within planning. I very rarely get agents and developers emailing me with problems, and I think it's a huge credit to the team who have been able to really turn things around in this area, and I'm excited about the future. So I'll hand over to Wendy to add in a bit more about what's been happening.
Thank you, Leader. Wendy, are you there?
I'm here, thank you. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, quite quiet.
Oh, okay. I don't know why. I'll try and talk a bit louder.
That's great, thank you.
Okay. So the key thing for me is, as we've kind of said, the amount of change that we've managed to bring. Part of concerns that I think were raised the last time I came to overview scrutiny was about performance. There was concerns about feedback, concerns about the development industry and the treatment that they were getting. We have worked really hard to recognise the value of growth. That means that when an application is submitted, we follow government policy, we follow local policy. Local policies, people spend a lot of time to develop those, and they are generally positive about development. And if the policies are saying we should be saying yes, we should be saying yes quickly. And there was a slight concern at times that there was a desire from planning officers to gold plate things. They could make them a bit better, but if they were acceptable to start with, they should be permitted. And that then has that cultural change, means you are making quicker decisions. You aren't then having to require an extension of time because you can determine that within the 8 or the 13 weeks. And it's just that kind of change that we're bringing forward. There's also been a dramatic change as a result of having loads more permanent staff. So again, another concern that has been raised with this committee in the past has been the amount of agency staff that we've had. And obviously that then does have an overhead on the permanent members of staff because there's a perception that they don't have that same ownership of the area that the staff does that live, work locally, and then obviously have neighbours and friends that are directly impacted. So a whole range of measures that we've brought in have fundamentally changed how we are moving forward. MasterGov is a great improvement. We did go forward with the minimal viable product, and what that means is it hadn't got everything that we were hoping for, but we needed to get it in place. And it had to be in place by the end of March. Otherwise, we were going to have to pay for the 3 legacy systems for another year. And so we were keen to do that. We did that. But there is some enhancements that we want to do. So, for example, I'm aware that members are a little bit unhappy that they haven't been able to have their weekly lists. There is a really good ABI platform that's being produced for that, and that should be available this week. That means it's going to be much quicker for members to be able to find out what's been determined in their wards, being able to be much more critiquing how they search for what's come in. And we're hoping that this will make life a lot easier for them. So when their constituents might raise an issue with them, they can find that case much more quickly. So there's a whole range of changes that we're doing. Planning improvement is a journey. I would love to say we are there. We are not. We still obviously continue to want to make improvements. The government loves planning. It's forever changing the planning system. And obviously that's the other thing we need to do, is make sure everyone understands what those changes are, why those changes have been made, and ensure that we're following those. And that's throughout the process. So unlike some other areas, BCP has always been very clear that its members need to be trained. Members have training, they have the ongoing training. Central government is recognising that itself, and it's through the planning and infrastructure bill they are suggesting that all members that sit on planning committee need to be trained. That's already something that's in place here. So there is a lot, as I say, that's coming forward, but a lot of good practice that's already in place here. Obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it does seem like, compared to last time we had this item in, quite a vast improvement on planning. It seems like a good news story. I'm not seeing anyone of the members indicating. So there's one thing I want to ask about first to sort of get it out the way, if I can, because part of this report which you've put in has a section on the local plan, and that's been as one of the work streams which I know has taken up a lot of the time from the planning team. And with the news that we had on that recently, could you, I see as well that it says, considering its next step to the next few weeks, and I know there's something coming into cabinet, the next cabinet possibly, I think it might be, or the one after. But could you give us a bit of an overview of what options are available? What happens in this current situation we find ourselves on? Are we still under legacy plans, or is it a bit of a anything can happen? And what's the impact on your department as well? How much officer time is this going to take, where we thought we were catching up with ourselves and now we might have to go back to the drawing board with this? Thank you. Sorry, I know it's quite a lot.
That's what I said. There's quite a lot of questions. So obviously, if I miss something, please do come back. So as you've highlighted, we had a conclusion from the inspectors following the sessions that we had in late January. The conclusion of this was that we hadn't fulfilled the duty to cooperate. That was primarily because of it was partly because of a change of government policy. So when we were working on the local plan, we were advised that housing figures were advisory, and you could have local figures if you had exceptional reasons. As we explained at the examination, the 2014 base projections highlighted that there was concerns over the data for Bournemouth as a result of how it counted student numbers. So we determined that we needed to have our own local figures. That was agreed. We had some consultants that did that. That was agreed with Dorset, and we were moving forward on that basis. We then had an advisory visit from the Planning Inspectorate that said that they didn't think that was a strong case and we should go on a constraints-based approach. But by taking that constraints-based approach, it meant we had a shortfall. So then we needed to discuss with our neighbours whether they could meet our shortfall. So it was that kind of change of policy that caused us a key issue. And we felt that could be clear on why that was, but the Inspectorate wasn't convinced. Even before that, with the planning reforms that the government brought in December, because the housing figures within the local plan was more than 20% difference from the standard method of the figure, which is nearer to 3,000, we already knew that we had to start work on a new local plan, even though we were going to be taking forward the submission local plan. So at that point, we were going to be having to be doing two plans. That would have been complex. But we felt that was the better position because it enabled us to almost park all the issues that had already been agreed as a result of the plan being adopted, but really focus on the changes that were coming purely from growth. Obviously, again, that isn't an option that we've now got. We've got to look at everything afresh. But that gives us opportunities as well. Because the plan is quite recent, some of our evidence base is up to date. And I think we're in a very fortunate position with the amount of work that had been spent with members determining their ward policies. And so we've got quite a strong basis on some areas to move forward, but it would be wrong to ignore the scale of the challenge. So the submission plan had a housing figure of 1,600. The new requirement is 2,958 a year, of which approximately 50% should be affordable. And so, being able to identify how that can be delivered, as I say, is going to be quite challenging. We are already starting work on some of the evidence. We were very fortunate and we got Greenbelt funding from government with Dorset. So we're going to start on a Greenbelt review to obviously feed into that work. I'm sure I've missed a question. Please come back.
It was just about the impact on your team, but it sounds like from you saying that you were continuing to develop the two plans anyway, that resource would already have been in place and it's not unexpected.
As I say, we already were aware as soon as the planning reforms came out through the National Planning Policy Framework that we were going to need to do a lot of additional work anyway. So that hasn't changed. The team obviously are disappointed because they'd spent a lot of time to get to this point. But as I said, members, we work obviously closely with members about the opportunities. The issue that we have now is the process. So because it was a decision of council that the plan was submitted for examination, we have to go to council for a decision on whether or not we are going to just withdraw or whether or not we're going to write to the Planning Inspectorate to ask them to send us a report that explains exactly why they consider we can't move forward. I think it's probably fair to say, obviously, officers' advice probably will be you want to move forward as quickly as possible. But obviously, as I say, it isn't a decision for officers, it's a decision for council to make. We will be going to Cabinet in May. And part of the reason for that is that we brought a local development scheme through to Cabinet literally the day after we'd had the letter, and that set out a time frame for the production of this partial review and the new plan. Obviously, things have got to change slightly. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Act requires you to produce a plan in 30 months, which is incredibly challenging from kind of start to finish. But it does enable you to do early engagement before the 30-month kind of starts. And our recommendation on that will be the more early engagement that we can do, the more refined then we can be for the consultations. And there's just 2 consultations. There's like a issues and options consultation and then a submission plan consultation. The more refined that we can be on that, we're hoping the more understanding the population will be of such a fundamental change that the council's having to look at, as I say, with housing figures of just under 45,000 for 15 years.
Thank you, Wendy. I know that that Cabinet's actually the day before our next Environment and Place Committee meeting, but it may be something which we want to talk about in our work planning and see if we want to see that despite Cabinet having done it. Maybe we want to take a view of that as well as how we can get involved and do it. But Councillor Goodall, I've got you to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to I appreciate this is a policy document and something of which I thoroughly approve of, but as a foot soldier at the other end, if I can put it, of the document, I just wanted to make a few points about how it's put together and to ask a few questions which I hope are relevant. The first was over the heading of home working. Can I be made aware of how many agencies staff work from home? And in connection with this, can we ask what the policy is concerning site visits? As an illustration, I had a visit with a colleague, the agent and the applicants. The agent asked for the planning officers to be present, but the planning officer was in London and had neither responded to the agent or been present nor been present on the site. So this is obviously an issue. The other point I wanted to make was that under the system, process and harmonisation, there are issues about the communication between planning and councillors, in the sense that, and this is no reflection on officers as such, but there quite often is not enough proactive work coming from the officers to let us know what's happening, particularly in an area. And again, I'm sorry to be specific on this, but this is an issue with a legacy case that was started off in Poole, and I was wondering how many legacy issues we still had. And when I was elected in 2023, we have an issue over planning, which, according to residents, has been going since 2017. And there has been KC advice on the case, which we haven't been allowed to see. And I wondered, as we are allowed to see other communications where finance is concerned, why we can't see a legal advice. And in this particular instance, and I'm sorry to be specific over a policy document, but there is the likelihood of a loss of life if there is a fire in this particular instance. It's an issue over 106, and I'm sorry if this is rather confusing question, but I'd really appreciate it if, when I ask an officer, or if an officer could come back to me and let me know when things are happening, because in this particular instance, I've only ever had one officer come back to me in a proactive way to do anything about this case, and mostly it's happened via me having to chase the officer, and I'm sorry that's the case.
Thanks, Councillor Goodall. Did you manage to catch all that, Wendy?
Yeah. So in relation to the first point about agency staffing working from home, as I've kind of highlighted, we have had in the past had significant numbers of agency staff. That has been dramatically reduced. And so we don't have as many. So most officers will be in the office about once a week or so, and then they tend to come in and do their site visits at the same time. So it might be worthwhile if Councillor Goodall maybe sends me the particular incidents that he's talking about, and I can kind of follow it up. But the expectation obviously is that staff are aware of their sites when they're making a determination, and obviously we need to just follow up. In relation to communication, again, I wouldn't be being truthful if I said that I think that we're perfect, because we're definitely not. And we have had incidences again, probably about this time last year, where we did have some agency staff, particularly those who were located not in England, who were very poor at communication, and we had lots of chases and lots of communication issues and complaints. Actually, those staff no longer work for the authority, and therefore we are very clear about the need to keep people updated. But again, if you can identify the cases, I'll follow that up. We have had quite a lot of personnel changes as a result of permanent recruitment. So I alluded to, I think we've only got 5 agency staff now, and they are specialist staff working on very complex cases to do with planning performance agreements. So they're the ones that we've got. Other than that, it's permanently recruited staff that we primarily use. I have alluded to the communication between planning officers. I have got a feeling I know the case that's being referenced, but again, if Councillor Goodall can just email me what it is, as say, I'm fairly sure it's probably Chalice Close Commercial Road, but if you can just clarify, obviously I'll follow that up. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on
Just
that?
to say, yes, it is. And I did want to just say, and I didn't say beforehand, that Parkstone has a lot of planning issues. And I just wanted to say that in most cases, the planning officers that Emily, Councillor Harman and I deal with have been absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list, I've got Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an improvement update for which I think we are all grateful. So I came into being a councillor in a situation where planning did not have a great reputation, and started to ask questions about, did we need to do a peer review of planning? But with Wendy's appointment, it seemed entirely fair and reasonable to allow her to try and turn this ship around, which I think she's beginning to do. I think there is still some way to go, and I think Wendy would accept that. The point I mean, and I would just endorse the final comments from Councillor Goodall. Certainly, the planning officers that I've dealt with the issues in my ward have always been incredibly helpful, and I'm very grateful for that. So, but my question, Chair, really is what happens next. So we've had the update, we've had the kind of reminder of where we are in relation to the local plan. And without being super critical, that process is seems to me it's going to take a long time for us to get a different local plan in place. And now, given that we are supposed to be building over 2,000 houses a year, I don't think we can wait another year whilst that plan is being developed. Somehow or another, we have to crack on and try and build more houses in the conurbation. So, in light of the fact that we've got effectively a statutory figure that's we're being told we need to build on, but no local plan against which to build it. What measures can we put in place in order to get on with it? Because we do need to somehow or another build more houses across the conurbation, and I'm just concerned that all of this change that we're seeing nationally, and all of the work that officers are having to do to replace the local plan that's been rejected effectively, what more can we do to actually ensure that we can get on with it, and that all of these issues are not encumbrances to us being able to do that? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. I think, Councillor Earl, that was directed more towards you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Canavan. And I completely agree. I think one of the biggest needs in my own community that I see on a day-to-day basis is the lack of available, suitable, safe housing. And I think that we all experience that as councillors and people asking us, what do they do? And quite honestly, we don't often have the answers. From my point of view, from as leader, and because this is my portfolio, I think we need to work really pragmatically with the new government guidelines that are coming through. I say guidelines, laws that are coming down the road, particularly around mandatory housing, and making sure that we are going to have that delivery pipeline. And the reason for that is the alternative is untenable. And I think of this in the same terms as the Section 114 threat that we had with our council finances, and we really needed to turn things around and recognise the issue and make difficult decisions to be able to combat that. And we've come out the other side. We have a good financial plan ahead and a balanced budget. And I kind of see planning in the same vein. If we don't respond in a pragmatic way to the government and what they have been elected to do and what they're asking us to produce, then we'll lose control of planning, and we will get houses or development happen that we have very little say over because we won't be able to demonstrate that pipeline, and also that isn't actually suitable to our needs as a community and our communities across BCP, because we won't have anything to point to say, because these are the rules. So I think it is essential that we do get on with doing a local plan, and I think we have some really good evidence, like the evidence base that we've got associated with our current draft local plan still exists. I think there are a lot of policies that we can take forward, but I think it is that fundamental, and the examiner was very clear that is around that fundamental inability to demonstrate how we would deliver that pipeline, and the fact we didn't cooperate with our neighbours on that because we were focusing on trying to demonstrate why we were so constrained. I think now we do need to be a lot more realistic in our approach, and that's going to be really difficult. It's going to be difficult for us as councillors, and I think it's going to be very difficult for our communities. But as Councillor Canavan often says, elections have consequences. That really sticks in my head at the moment, and this is what our government has a mandate to make us do. So our role as a council is to get the best from this situation for our communities, and that doesn't just mean our current communities. It also means our future communities, and particularly when we look at housing, it doesn't take a lot to see those problems within our communities, and we need to make sure that we are representing everyone's problems that they face and the issues they face, and housing continues to be something that we all see on a day-to-day basis as a challenge for our communities. So I'm really keen we do get on, and I think that meantime approach is something I'm really interested in exploring. And as a cabinet, we have a session in with Wendy and her team, and also with Margaret, who's our local plan delivery lead member, and the rest of cabinet, to look at how we can overcome some of these issues within the short term and not lose control of planning completely because we can't demonstrate that pipeline, but also how we can really get the basics right on this local plan so that we're not falling down at the first hurdle and we actually have a solid base on which to build. So I'm feeling quite optimistic, but I think that we need to be really realistic as councillors about what we're being asked to do. Just to give you a visual, we had a block of flats with a planning application at the Lansdowne, which was about 20 stories high. It would have delivered around 300 homes, quite small flats. We would have to build 10 of them a year to deliver on this. And, if we're talking 20 stories, that's a lot. So imagine if we had to do that across all of our districts, our town centres, and even our, more suburban residential areas, 10 a year in those times would be very difficult. So we do need to think much more imaginatively about what we're willing to compromise on as councillors and where we can deliver these homes, not just in certain areas, but across the whole area, because we're going to have to seriously think about our land use. We're going to have to seriously think about things like the green belt, and we're going to have to seriously think about the heights as well that we go to across our towns. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, we're getting a little bit off the paper and the planning improvement service. I'm getting the feeling that we might want to, with the local plan coming up after being in the cabinet, that some of those things you were talking about might be something we want to hear. So perhaps when we get to our work plan, we might end up inviting you back in the portfolio holder as well to talk about the bigger picture as well. But Councillor Canavan, did you want to come back on that at all? No. Councillor Wright, did you indicate?
I did. Yeah, just wondered the improvements that you spoke about. Did they extend to planning enforcement? I get a lot of emails from residents, from developers breaching, pushing that little bit beyond what the plans were, and not a lot being done about it. It's been planning enforcement's been a bit lacking from what I can see. I wonder if now you say about these improvements, whether it will be a bit more forthright in getting things done.
Thank you, Wendy. I think that's one for yourself.
That is. I'm sorry to hear that you don't think our planning enforcement function is very effective, because I think it is. I think the problem we have often is understanding the planning system. A lot of the time, when people think there is a breach, there often isn't a breach, and that's because of the changes that have come from government in relation to permitted development rights. So that's a right given by government to do actually quite a lot of development. And then even if we do determine that there is a breach, government policies that we have to see if it's expedient to take action. So just because somebody hasn't sought planning permission, if we would give planning permission anyway, we can ask them to do a retrospective planning application, but we can't insist that they do. We also have a lot of planning enforcement issues which are property issues. So that's issues around party walls, that's issues around encroachment. Again, anything to do with civil property is not a planning enforcement issue. So that for me is a lot of our time is actually spent advising people why we can't take action. And it's not because the team doesn't want to, is because we haven't got the remit to do so. But if there are particular cases where you feel that the investigation hasn't been as robust as it should be, please draw them to my attention, and I'll come back to you after I've followed up with the team.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I come to Councillor Northover, you mentioned something which I was going to ask about, and I think it just fits in here. You mentioned permitted development, and I know there's been some changes with permitted development, that a lot of permitted developments now need prior approval from applications to go in. So in my own personal experience, that's sort of over 50 kilowatts of solar photovoltaics, other just above microgeneration. What or how many applications are you getting of that sort? And is it causing any issues with these coming in as kind of a, excuse me, minor planning application, which is not really a planning application, but has to be responded to in a fairly short period of time?
We actually don't get that many of those type of applications. We get many more of the householder prior approvals. And so, as you've alluded to, normally they are quite limited in relation to the issues that we can look at, and they are also limited in relation to time frame. So most prior approval, you say prior approval is given, prior approval is not required, or if we don't go back within the 8 weeks to say prior approval is given or isn't given, it's an automatically given. That's prior approvals on a range of things, including things like telecoms. Part of the problem that we've had is the understanding again of what we can consider and what we can't consider. There has been some particular concerns recently around extensions to flatted development, whereby flatted blocks can have an additional 2 stories put on top. And the assumption is that we can take into account things like loading on the structure. That's a building control issue. We're not allowed to consider that. There's only very limited scope. So prior approvals, we do get quite a lot. In all fairness, some of the early ones, such as office to residential conversions, they've kind of tailed off. but that's because the most attractive locations for those types of prior approvals have already gone. But it's, as I say, the government loves, whoever's in administration, do love changing prior approvals because of that desire, obviously, to give certainty to the market that it's likely that that would be allowed. And as I say, the way we considered them is the government has said, subject to certain conditions, this is allowed. It's not for us to disagree with that. That's government, that's given in legislation. It's just seeing if those particular tests are being met. So, for example, there might be particular issues around flooding. So it would be allowed in all locations other than if it was in a flood location, or it would be allowed in all locations unless it was in a setting of a listed building. And there has been a lot of changes around some of the micro generation, as you've alluded to, but we haven't actually had that many applications for that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Northover.
Thank you. My question is also about enforcement because, like Councillor Wright said, I was under the impression from the response from planning that there's enormous pressure and there's a massive backlog. And just looking back at a recent email, the reason I think that is because it says it in the email when you send them an email. But it's also quite negative, and it gives the impression that we just are so overwhelmed that we haven't got time. So I'd complained about a super flashing LED light above a shop, which I'm really sure is a planning breach. But the email is quite long and it sort of just keeps saying over and over again. For example, it says, please be aware that adverts are low priority for the team. It goes on to say that due to unprecedented rise in inquiries, it's likely there'll be a delay. And then it goes on again later to say we may not do anything about it. It's sort of quite, to be honest, because I got that response and I've never had a reply to it, and that was back in last year, and I've seen 2 more recently, and I've not actually sent them in, even though I'm quite certain I'm right, because that response is so negative and because I didn't get a response further to it. So I was fully under the same impression as you that there's just no capacity and there's a massive backlog. So yeah, that's my experience. Thank you.
Okay, well, again, I'm sorry to hear that's the reaction that you've had. The truth is, adverts generally are the lower priority. If you look at our local enforcement plan, they aren't the most priority case. We obviously, though, the higher scale stuff are issues around kind of listed buildings, kind of some of your more formalised development. But if you, again, don't mind sharing the particular case with me, we will definitely look. Adverts are a challenging area because there are certain things that I've deemed consent. But if it's flashing, again, that's probably something that I'm aware that we've been dealing with a particular case in Parkstone. They did submit a planning application for that. That was obviously considered and determined. So I'm aware that sometimes that's the way it works, is that there is an issue, the officers contact them, they give them the opportunity to submit a retrospective planning application to deal with a breach, and then that kind of moves forward. Obviously, the issue that sometimes we have is if the retrospective is refused, and then the issue is it expedient to take enforcement action, which is something like an enforcement notice. But again, if you draw that particular one to my attention, I will see where it is. But as I say, they should all be logged. So it shouldn't just be, it should all be closed. And you should be notified if it's been closed because it's been determined not to be expedient. So again, I will follow up. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Can I just come back to say?
I think Councillor Earl wants to add something.
Yeah.
It was very, very brief. It was just to add that sometimes when I get things around signs, and we had a really big issue in my area, then I also find it quite useful to go to environmental officers as well and look at it from an environmental health perspective, especially if it's flashing, especially if it's like right on a corner and could cause a crash. Essentially, there's a sign in that I once got turned down because it was just too bright when you were driving in the evening. It was basically dazzling, and I think sometimes looking at them, planning is very policy based. And environmental health, and actually looking at the impact that it's causing to people who live there, who live around it, who may go by it and whatever, then that can be quite helpful to get a bit more of an enforcement action, but just from a different team.
I just wondered where is the decision made that that's low priority?
Did you catch that, Wendy?
Yeah, so it's in our local enforcement plan. So there's a local enforcement plan that's been published online about how we prioritise our cases.
Okay, thank you. We've got a few more minutes on this paper. If anyone's got anything else they want to add or any other comments. Otherwise, I think then that's covered most of the things I wanted to ask myself as well. So yeah, we can leave that item there. Thank you for bringing that to us, Wendy, leader. We did go quite in depth there and sort of into a few other bits, which always happens when we get planning things. We appreciate you bearing with us and some interesting answers. But I think the improvements are clear to see, and it's a much nicer position we find ourselves in at the moment, despite those issues potentially with enforcement, which may be something we want to look at and focus on more in the future. But for now, thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And then that brings us on to item number 8, which is the recommendations from the Safer Accommodation Strategy Working Group, which is a fun thing because we get to scrutinise ourselves and the work that our members have been doing as part of a working group. So, Councillor Northover, you are the lead member on this group, and what I want to do is on this item, if it comes to you, you can introduce it, talk us through. We've got a couple of other members of the working group here, Patrick Canavan, who's subbing, and also Councillor Salmon online. So I'll just go to them afterwards to see if they want to add anything too. And then we can debate what you've brought to us. There's a number of recommendations there as well, so we can go through them and decide which ones we want to carry forward to Cabinet. And also there's some recommendations to us as well as the environment in place. But for now, please, if you can introduce it.
Okay, so these are the findings and recommendations from our Scrutiny Working Group on Safe Accommodation Strategy. I'd just like to thank Rebecca and Lindsay for their guidance, and also Tracy Kybert, Ben Tomlin, Kat Macmillan and Katie Blake, who provided information as requested and answered all the questions of our working group. Also on the working group was Councillor Canavan, Councillor Farr and Councillor Salmon, and it was grounded in 3 lines of inquiry, which I'll take you through alongside our recommendations to Cabinet and to this committee. So the first line of inquiry was looking at levels of support through refuge and housing, past, present and future. We examined how support for domestic abuse survivors has evolved and how it will look going forward. A core finding for us was that there was not a one-size-fits-all solution. Many survivors declined refuge spaces, not due to availability, but because the group setting wasn't appropriate for their needs. So in turn, a broad accommodation offer is essential, recognising the diverse profiles of survivors, because different things are needed, because there's different people with all sorts of different issues. So these are things like age, could be disabilities, family size, different people's resources, their own commitments, their work, pets, and the safety of the location, Bournemouth needing to go further sometimes. The working group was really, really impressed by the officers' awareness of the whole issue, their awareness of diversity, how thoughtful and passionate they were in their approach to the strategy and all of their work. We were, I think, just they were way ahead of most of the questions that we had, and really impressive. Our second line of inquiry was the role of refugees in a modern society, and that is the refuge that brought about this piece of work, thinking about that. And we're recognising that they still have an important role, but must sit within a wider ecosystem of options. So that includes dispersed, specialist and sanctuary accommodation. Survivors' financial uncertainty, especially with complex housing situations. So some have joint tenancies, or they might already have a mortgage. these are key barriers for them to leave abuse. So more guidance is needed, as there is help, but it's not very widely known about always. Our third key line of inquiry was about the consultation and engagement plan looking forward. We were encouraged by the inclusion of lived experience in the engagement plan. There are, however, concerns about transparency of commissioning, and we feel that members of this committee should have the opportunity to input before the contracts are let. And then the closure of the Bournemouth refuge, whilst not a breach of the process, generated a big public backlash, and the lack of councillor engagement reduced our ability to explain and support the decision publicly. So our recommendations to Cabinet are to raise awareness through a campaign on looking at financial support options and housing complexities and what we can offer people, to embed the lived experience, ensuring that survivor voices shape the strategy, that we should have an all councillor briefing so that we can inform residents, so that we as councillors can inform residents and avoid miscommunication. The provision of the safe accommodation commissioning process should be shared with scrutiny members before we have the final decisions. The temporary accommodation and KPIs are established, and that we regularly review outcomes such as move-on rates and survivor satisfaction. That there's a decision-making culture change within the council so that Cabinet and senior officers need to consider public impact and not just their thresholds when deciding whether or not to brief councillors. And then our recommendations to this committee is that we should re-engage our working group again once the commissioning is underway, to that this group, this committee rather, assists in developing and testing key performance indicators, and that we schedule annual progress updates on the safe accommodation strategy with invitations to other ONS chairs so that they can plan scrutiny in their areas. And that's all of it. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Northover. I'll just go to the other committee members first, or the other working group members first, I should say, to see if they have anything to add. So, Councillor Canavan.
Well, no, not really, Chair. I think Councillor Northover has covered it quite thoroughly. But I think it was a really interesting piece of work to do, very informative, and I think it was well worthwhile in the end. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And Councillor Salmon, if you're there online.
Hi, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So, similarly, I think Lisa's Councillor Northover has covered it very well, given a good summary, and I think that the recommendations that have gone into the report are very comprehensive. I think it was a really useful piece of work, and I think we've come up with a good set of things to come out of it and take further and make sure we develop. I think the one I'd like to highlight, and Councillor Northover did cover it, was the there were lots of really important things came out of this, but I think the thing that I'd like to highlight the most probably is the business of taking that sort of common sense approach on if a decision is going to have a potentially significant or a contentious impact, and not just be on the sort of financial size of a decision, because that was what the refuge closure really showed us very clearly, that we need to have take that view on decisions, and whether or not and how to involve councillors in them, because of what can happen if we don't. And we got an unfortunate case study to help us maybe avoid that happening again in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Salmon. I've noticed Councillor Wilson's online, who's the portfolio holder for this. So once we've finished our discussion as well, we can go to Councillor Wilson if he wants to add anything at the end once we've made our decisions. So anyone on the committee want to kick things off? Got any questions we want to ask or any comments? Councillor Dalton Gibson.
Yeah, it's perhaps as much about the report as anything. I was somewhat surprised reading the summaries at the bottom of the main report. It says equalities implications. There are no equalities implications, which to me sounds like lip service, because statistically, I will bet that there are more women affected by domestic abuse than men. There are men, I don't deny that, but there is therefore an inequalities. And I think when we write that sort of thing in these reports, it sort of shows we're paying lip service and haven't really thought about it enough. And I would just encourage that, those should be taken quite seriously. And, and if we say, we've considered it and, our provision will deal for both, but it will affect women more than men simply because of the numbers who report, I think we're just fulfilling our Equalities Act duties more full by showing we've actually thought about it rather than just ignoring it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Really good point, I think. Councillor Northover.
I don't know if I've only just really noticed that, but that's on the summary for this meeting, but I don't think that was our report as such saying that. So it's almost saying, did our working group itself have any equality? Because the work being done as a result of it all will all have its own equality impact assessments. But our working group, as a working group, I don't think that's what it means. This this front paper to our report.
I think I hear what you're saying. This is the equality implications, which is written into the officers' report papers, which introduce these items as standard and is kind of included in everything. But I think it's relevant that it would be good to know exactly what that covers. And I don't think any of us in the room at the moment can particularly answer it, but maybe we can highlight it in the future for what it means when it comes in on reports. Councillor Red.
Would your point, would it not be the case that now there's no refuge and everyone goes into individual accommodation, if you're male or female, then there is little equality. You couldn't put a guy in a all-female refuge, but if everyone's going to individual accommodation, there's less of an issue. And like you said, there's no one-size-fits-all support. That's all individual. So I'm thinking there probably isn't so much of a equality issue.
That's not necessarily what this is about, though. Yeah. Because that will all come out of the consultation. So it's not that it's not being looked at. No. Yeah.
Yeah, but not as part of your working group. I've got a question on one of the recommendations, and it's recommendation 4A, that the provision of safe accommodation and associated commissioning process be reviewed. Can you just tell me what that means? Because I just couldn't quite wrap my head around exactly what that's asking for.
It's saying that when we get to the point that we have done the consultation and made the decision, that it's reviewed. So we're not just saying, yeah, go ahead, and never and then down the line something quite controversial happens again, and we are not reviewing it. We're actually asking for things to come back.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Canavan.
I think that's right from what Councillor Northover has just said. The point I think we were trying to make was we were in a situation where officers were looking in detail at what needed to be provided, at what the demand was, and all those sorts of things. And decisions are clearly going to be made on the back of that consultation and that consideration as to what to do, what sort of housing that we are going to provide. And it's that stage that we're wanting to try and get back in. So if they decide we want 6 of Y and 10 of Z, that's the point at which we'd like just to be reassured that that's actually going to meet the need that we think there is out there. Because on the data that we've got, we pretty much know what that demand is. It isn't going to go down. So that's what that's about, really. It's just trying to add that extra reassurance that what the council ends up doing is what we'd like it to do, and that we don't fall into the trap of inappropriate accommodation being commissioned.
Great, thank you for that. That clears it up. When I was just reading it, I was a little bit like, what are we reviewing? So that explains a lot. While no one else has indicated, I'm going to carry on. It's a question, and I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer this question or not. One of the things I noticed when I was reading through this, that you alluded to as well, is that there's no one size fits all when it comes, and there was a lot nothing was taken into consideration, or it was all taken into consideration, sorry, such as gender and age and things like that. One thing that struck me recently, and I don't know whether you'll have discussed this in the group, and it may be something we want to raise as a committee, if not, is that the safer accommodation strategy focuses a lot on domestic abuse, and in the definition of what domestic abuse is very much along with people who are in relationships, whether that's familial or partners who are living together. But the nature of how people are moving into houses now and buying houses as well is that friends are buying houses together, friends are renting houses together. And as part of the domestic abuse strategy, that cannot be looked at. And I'm wondering whether this safer accommodation strategy of people who may have moved into a property on a 12-month leave and feel trapped by what is a friend or someone they live with rather than a direct partner, or may have got a mortgage with a friend between, I think you can get them between 3 or 4 people up to now, that they may feel trapped in these situations. Is there assistance for people in that situation as well as domestic abuse situations? Was that anything you looked at or thought about?
We did look at what incredibly wide and varied situations there can be. So I feel like the team is quite sort of open to everything and almost I wouldn't want to give examples because that would give the impression that they are, but they did cite some examples of things that I would never have thought of. And, you know, that there's, for example, there can be some very elderly people who have been fine through their whole lives, but through dementia and things like that could start to have issues. Or just it's been in the radio this week about children being violent to their own family, quite young children. That's domestic abuse. So I feel like they were so very open and thinking that I don't think that they would have, the impression I have is that they wouldn't have sort of a closed idea and exclude various people because of something like that. So, but I think we would probably have to check with some of those scenarios in case I'm wrong.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Canavan?
I think that's absolutely right. I think that was one of the fascinating things actually that came out of the questions that we were asking officers, that it wasn't just about domestic abuse, you know, that they were thinking about commissioning more broadly than that, about people that needed safe accommodation in whatever set of circumstances they were in. So that was really reassuring. And that was the other reason, I think, why we were wanting to get into the detail of the commissioning, just to make sure that what was being commissioned suited those different client groups, if I can use that expression. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the committee with any further questions or comments on this? No, in that case, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make a slight amendment to one of the recommendations to this committee, so the Environment and Place O&S committee, and it's just to remove some wording, and it's on number 7 on the recommendations. And all I'd like to do is remove and agrees to re-engage this working group, and just so the amendment would read, notes recommendation 4 to Cabinet and agrees to support commissioning work at an appropriate time. Because I think we've said in full council a couple of times that if we agree to recommission a working group, it may not be the right thing at the right time, and we may want to do it in a different way. So just to remove the restriction of having it as a working group, and we may choose to do it in a different way. That'd be the only amendment I'd like to raise, if anyone would like to second that. Yeah, Councillor Dalton Gibson. And can we take that by consensus, or does anyone want to debate on it? Okay, great. Oh, thank you. If there's nothing more from here, I may ask Councillor Wilson, do you want to speak to this, or any of the recommendations which will be coming through to Cabinet, which Councillor Northover and myself will bring to the next Cabinet?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Northover and the rest of the working group on this. I haven't got a huge amount to add. To be honest, I just kind of wanted to listen in more than anything. I suppose just initially looking at the recommendations, I think they're all very good, more or less. There's some stuff that I would hope we would be doing anyway. You know, for example, recommendation number 2 about listening to people with lived experience, etc. But I think it's important to have it there and be reminded. The only well, number 4, obviously, I think that was some good clarification from the members of the working group. I think that has to probably work through. But number 9 was the only thing that I had like a little bit of, not concern, but just and it was the last part around this may be part of a wider annual update scrutiny on housing matters. And obviously it's kind of ifs and buts, but I just wouldn't want it to get diluted. I think this is a really standalone important issue, and I think it should stand alone and be focused on by itself, and that would be my only concern with that one line. But yeah, no, really positive and just grateful for the work that's gone into this. And I suppose one thing I would like to just mention, bit of a shameless plug, but we do actually have 3 consultations out at the minute around this topic for preventing domestic abuse strategy, our draft safer accommodation strategy, and our draft perpetrator strategy. So if you can, within your channels, promote those and get as many people contributing to them, that would be really fantastic. But no, apart from that, nothing more to add really. Just appreciative of the working group's input.
Great, thank you very much. Which leaves it all, get my words out properly. All that leaves for us to do is to agree that we're going to take these recommendations to Cabinet. So can we just take that by consensus? Agreed, unanimous? And then the last thing is to agree that we accept the recommendations to this committee as well. So can I do that again by consensus? Brilliant. Thank you very much. And that takes us on to the penultimate item number 9, which is Councillor Rice, who's a member of this committee, was going to give us a update on the play streets. So, Councillor Rice.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Really pleased to be bringing this to the committee again. Just to highlight that this is a sort of trial almost of bringing small items of work through ONS to ensure that small items don't get lost in the big machine of the council. So it's a method that councillors can bring items through and ensure that it gets followed up through a formal process. So this is the first item that's been done in this way, and it's been really helpful for me, and I think it's worked really well. So basically, play streets is the idea that residents on a relatively quiet residential street are able to close off their road and make it safe for kids, their families, and anybody on the street to hang out on the street and socialise and play and chat, have a cup of tea, and like people used to, like if you speak to grandparents like they always used to do, and so just enabling that type of socialisation to happen. So a lot of other councils in the country already have this. So it was a relatively small piece of work to sort of copy a policy and get it into place here. And as part of the process of bringing it through ONS, we were able to ensure that it did happen. So following the last meeting, I've had 2 meetings with the staff that have been able to write the policy and work on it. And I had a meeting this morning and have reviewed the draft policy, I'm very pleased to say. And so hopefully in the next 3 weeks, we should have a policy that is ready to go. So residents should be able to apply for it. We've still got to wait a little bit longer for it to go onto the website, and then we will be getting some comms going out about it when it's really easily accessible by residents. But good news, and yeah, it's if anybody wants to see the detail of the draft, if anybody particularly wants to see it before it gets made into policy, then get in contact with me. But yeah, it's just really good to have this coming to fruition and enabling play across BCP.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Wright?
Yeah, these are temporary closures, yeah? Is that right?
Yeah. Often they're done. People maybe do them for an hour every week on a particular day, or up to 3 hours, really, Sunday afternoon, something like that. It can happen weekly, fortnightly, monthly, or even less than that. But you can put it on the same form. So if people want to do it monthly, you just fill in a form once, and it's every 4th Sunday on the 4th Sunday of the month, for example. And then you've just done that one form, and it means that you can do it monthly, for example.
Can I
I hope
ask?
that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
Can I ask, so is it residents who would enforce this closure as well? So they would close the street themselves. It's just it's a policy which allows the residents to close the street for play. Is that correct?
Yeah. So because just to make it safe, I suppose, on a lot of different roads. Some people on like cul-de-sacs maybe already do it, where there's hardly any traffic and they just informally do it. But if you live on a road where there's a bit more traffic and you just want to make sure it's quiet enough, then yes, you need to have a legal process application that's done, so that you can just. People often just hang a road closed sign between 2 wheelie bins at either end, and then that legally just means that you can ask people not to drive up it, or if they live on the street, then they can drive up at walking pace and then park on the street, and deliveries can still happen, and caring services can still happen, but it's just a little bit calmer.
Great. It sounds really good. I look forward to this coming in place, because I've not played Kirby since I was about 12 years old, and I'd love a good game of that. Anyone else got any questions? No, in that case, thanks very much for the update. That's really great. You know, I'm a big fan of play, and the more ways we can get it so people can just do it outside their front door, the better. I think it'll be really good to see what the uptake is like once this gets published. And I'd be really interested in having a look at the draft policy. If you can send it across, I'd definitely love to have a read.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Okay, and that then takes us on to item 10, which is the work plan. And considering we got most of that out of the way earlier in the meeting, this is just to put in what we've got coming up for our next meeting, or our next future meetings. I have been speaking to the Democratic Services officers and said that we are overdue, the same as a few of the Overview and Scrutiny committees are actually, to have a full work plan and exercise where we look much further ahead at what we've got and do the strategy. And I've been told that that's not likely to happen for at least around 6 months, something like that, and we'll all catch up together and go through that process again. But in the meantime, we have got quite a full forward plan, albeit just with not having dates allocated to the meetings. I think for the next one, we've asked potentially for an update on the plant-based foods options, as that's a topic which keeps cropping up at full council and having questions asked, and we've got space for that. And it was about 6 months ago that the plant-based treaty was bought, and we thought we could update on not necessarily the treaty, but where we are with the resolutions which came out of this committee, which was effectively to go away and come back with some ideas and some numbers and some KPIs. And I don't know about all of you, but following the planning service improvement we just had then, we did seem to want to open that up a little bit further into the more bigger planning strategy and the upcoming plan. And I know that this committee is the day after Cabinet are going to speak about that, but I think I'd be interested in suggesting that we actually take that paper, although it will have gone through Cabinet, to see what value this committee can add to the redrafting of the local plan, because I think we've done some really good work on it last time of getting involved, and I think it'd be a good time to pick that up again and see how that's redeveloped. So we can ask for that to come to the next meeting if people are in agreement. Yeah, I'll take that as a yeah. And then for the future items, again, if you're just happy for me and the Vice Chair to go away and look at what we can strategically bring on, where the report's going to be ready and what we can ask to be put in place. Councillor Canavan.
I just wanted to ask a question, if I may. On the cliff and coastal erosion item, it says here that a briefing session has been offered. I can't even guess what that means, but perhaps you might be able to clarify what that means. But I'm just wondering if that's right. So I've had an exchange of emails with the relevant director because we've had to mow another landscape quite recently, which has damaged the land train shed and some of the beach huts. And the response I got from the director was that the Environment and Place were going to do a deep dive into coastal erosion, and I'm just wondering if that's what that means.
That is not quite what that means, but that is what that means. We got the offer of the briefing session, which we then went back and said, what do you want to brief us on? Because what we don't like having is people just turning up and telling us what a great job they're doing. And we've had that previously with some reports, and particularly with the FSM team, when they've brought us a lot of good news stories on what they're doing. And we want to investigate a little bit further. And we did ask for that to come to the next meeting, but their resources aren't available to do that. So we're in the process of getting that to our July meeting. That's the intention, to bring it at that point, and then we can properly look at it. But I believe that their resources are tied up in the fact that there's just been some cliff slides and they're dealing with that before coming to us. No problem. Anyone else want to add anything? Councillor Northover?
I was not thinking of anything in particular on our list, but just thinking about how Councillor Rice did her bit of work there, going away, finding some stuff out and bringing it back to us. And I wonder if we can think about that in the future with some of our issues that could be dealt with like that, because it seems like a really efficient, much faster way of cracking on through some of the things that we'd like to get more info about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that as well. I think Councillor Rice has done some great work there, and I think we've got opportunities where if members have a particular interest in something, then we could enable any of you to go away and do some deeper work. And then even if that's just to say, we found out that actually we need to do something more on this, so that opportunity is always available. If there is any particular specialist interests or anything anyone wants to do, then please speak to us and we can arrange to make that happen. Anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Goodall.
Sorry, I wasn't going to raise this because I was going to write to the two of you, but I just wanted, with the protests that happened about the Christchurch water situation and Poole Harbour, I wondered whether we could, in the not too distant future, have a presentation by SIFCA and also Wessex Water about the situation concerning Christchurch Harbour in particular, and perhaps bring in some people from the university who have been looking at the quality of the water in Poole Harbour, both Poole Harbour and Christchurch. Thank you.
Yes, so that item, particularly with regards to Christchurch Harbour, which was the petition which came into the last full council, that will be coming into item 6 on our next agenda, where we decide if we want to add it to the work plan And then if we choose to add it to our work plan, not preempting that we probably will, then we can then decide how we want to go about that piece of scrutiny work. So that'd be when that can be raised. But if you've got ideas and how you want to do it, then you can raise it onto that item and we can decide there and then if that's the route that we want to take.
Can I just add to that? I did actually raise much the same issue and say, well, why couldn't we decide it today? But the reason was that these papers were already published before the council's decision, so we couldn't do it this time. We have to wait until so that it can be publicly processed.
Thank you. Okay, so I think if there's nothing from anyone else, that all that leaves to do is close the meeting by saying the date of the next meeting will be 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the 14th of May. And thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for anyone who's following online. And thank you to everyone who's contributed to this meeting tonight. And good night. Thank you.